in the chat to tell me these things. We can't hear you. So again, we're talking goalies here. And why do they suck so much? Why do they seem to suck so much for the Isles? Why is spending on goalies generally a bad idea? And have the Isles fix things? So, sorry about that. Now that we've seemingly fixed things, let's try this again. So basically, I feel like I'm saying this again. So this is last year's goalie numbers right here, okay? Your spread between your best goalie, which was Josh Hart, which was Tuukka Rask. You'll see his name a bunch, by the way, so hold on to that. We've mentioned 9-4-3 even strength. This is all even strength. We'll get to why we deal with that shortly. 9-4-3, and our worst here in this qualifying one was Devin Dubnyk. You'll recognize number 39, also horrible, is Kevin Poulin. So our spread here is around 4%. 4% is pretty huge. It's a big amount. Just for comparison here, let's look up the average amount of shots that goalie faces. That most goalies face, really, because most starters, at least. Goalie? Cool. See, most starters can only face around, 1,400 or 1,500 starts. Varlamov faced 2,000. He was extreme last year because Colorado couldn't stop shots from coming at him. For just going to EV, which we should, EV, most goalies face around, about somewhere between basically 1,000 shots. Is about a reasonable amount. Okay? That's assuming they start and play 50 games. Not every goalie did that. The Islanders didn't have one last year. Nabokov started 40 games and managed 836. So, let's say 1,000 right there, right? If there's a 4% difference in 1,000 games, that's a 40-goal difference between worst and best. That's pretty huge. Which is why goalies are incredibly important. I apologize again, I'm repeating this. Goalies are incredibly important. Yeah, people tweeting me no sound. They should have, came in the chat and said that. Okay. Anyhow, goals are incredibly important here. Okay, that's a huge difference here. 40 goals. Again, our usual math is 3 goals equals a point in the standing. So 40 goals is 13 points. That's a huge amount. I think 13 points would have got one team there from the beginning. But this is just, individual players. If you want to look at the individual teams, again, 5v5 only here. Our gap here is about 3.2%. You'll notice really Boston is again 9-4 because Boston had Rask. Boston does that. They do that a lot. We'll get to that in a little bit. The Islanders, by the way, were 27th last year in 5v5 save percentage. They were last in overall for a reason I'll get to. But again, you're not really comparing best to lower than average to worst. You're really comparing best to average. Let's go back again here. So, ignoring Tuukka Rask here. So Rask is a bit of an exception, usually. But really, even if you take the number 6 goalie, and then you take the number 35 goalie. So these are moving your top 5 and bottom 5 here. So you're basically, so you're lopping off about 12.5%. And now your gap is between 9.10 and 9.3. So now your gap is 2.3% here. And again, compared to the average of these guys, average this year is about 9.25. So your number 6 here was only 0.8% better than average. Your number 35, was only about 1.5% worse than average. And to use a name that Islander fans know and love, Nabokov is about 1% worse than average. So Nabokov on even strength alone, and again, I'll get to more. There's more than even strength of goaltending here. Knockoff with even strength, 800 shots, was about 8 goals worse than the average goalie. So that's 3 standings points. It's not a lot. Now, the problem is severalfold. One is that Nabokov wasn't the goalie for all 82 games. And so again, you have here, at your bottom, Kevin Poulin, who played nearly as many minutes as Nabokov and was a lot worse. Poulin was about a little more than 1% worse. Now, I want to get back for a second here. So I've basically been talking about how goalies don't differ that much, but the Islanders had a few awful goalies last year. And I tried to talk before I realized my mic was muted, is that if you go to over 3-year sample size, this spread between worst and best and worst and average gets a lot smaller. But I do want to talk about it here, because I should, because I'm sure some of you are thinking about it. Why am I using just save percentage to measure goalies? So save percentage seems like a logical thing to use for goalies. I'm using 5v5 here, I'll get to that in a second. Because save percentage measures each shot that a goalie faces and whether they saved it or not. So, unlike, say, goals against average, another measure of goalies, we don't care about how many shots a goalie faces. If a goalie faces 100 shots or a goalie faces 50 shots, save percentage isn't going to, penalize the guy who faces 100 shots. Goals against average will. But a lot of people would argue that how do you know it's the goalie's fault that he has a low save percentage? Maybe it's the defense. After all, Boston's an incredible defensive team. They're number 1. Whereas the Islanders are not really considered a great defensive team. And naturally, they have a whole bunch of goalies who don't go in there. Now, mind you, I can pick up a few examples here to contrast that. So, for example, Marty Brodeur, the Devils unquestionably were a good defensive team last year, and he was at .902. Let me tell you something, that was Brodeur, not the Devils. You can see by Corey Schneider, who actually by 5v5 did worse than usual, but he actually overall did pretty good, and he's actually a very good goalie. Similarly, for example, you would consider Carolina a great defensive team, but Anton Khudobin, I don't know how to pronounce that, was at 9.35, or Colorado is an awful defensive team, 9.37. You get the point. The basic idea is that we found, and this is one of those hard-to-believe things, that whatever the differences in defenses, and there are differences in defenses between teams, and this is a very weird finding, that teams don't really reduce the percentage of shots that come from more dangerous areas. So what I mean is that, let's say a team has given up, I'm going to go over here, let's say a team gives up 30 shots per game, it's team 1. We're going to use it 3 games here just for easy. Every 3 games gives up 100 shots. And Team 2, would say Team 2 is amazing and gives up only 50 shots. Again, these are unrealistic numbers, but you get the idea. Maybe Team 2 is like the total trapping Devils. What our research has found that over a longer period of time, so let's make this now not 3, let's make this 30 games, so 1,000 shots. And we'll make this more realistic, let's make it 800 shots. 30 games. But what we found generally is that Team 2 and Team 1 will do the same percentage of these shots from dangerous areas. So let's just say that of those 1,000 shots, 10% are really in close prime scoring chances. So 100 are prime scoring chances. This is probably a bit high, but whatever. 200 are decent chances. And 700 are laughers. Okay? These are ones the goalie should save. The goalie doesn't save them. Even Butch Goring isn't going to say that Nabokov didn't have a chance in this one. Our research suggests that over a period of time, and 800 shots may not be enough, but it's close enough. Oh my god, phone's ringing again. I apologize. Sorry, we're back. And so that, if we have 800 shots from Team 2, we would suspect that 80 are prime scoring chances. Again, these numbers are totally pulled out in the ass, but the idea is the same here. 160 are decent chances. And 540 are total laughers. Or 560 are total laughers. I can't do math. And what this means is that really, the difference between Team 1 and Team 2 isn't that Team 1's defense allows the opponent to get in more often. They don't. What Team 1 does is it allows more shots. Really, Team 1 basically allows the opponent more time in their own zone. Team 2 gets the puck out a lot easier, and therefore the goalie has an easier time. And here's the thing. If this is true, and again, this is hard to believe, so I understand that, and please drop a question in chat, or I guess in Twitter. I guess I'll check Twitter every now and then, but I'd rather not. Is that the defense really isn't affecting a team's save percentage, because save percentage doesn't care how many shots the goalie faces. So if, a quarter of these go in, on average, they're each facing the same amount of these quarter go in shots. So save percentage is not really caring. Now, again, this is a very hard to believe concept. Do defenses really not have the ability to keep shots from the outside? It certainly seems like they do. And it certainly seems like on a shorter sample that's probably true. But for the most part, at the NHL level, and by the way, I need to emphasize this. This is the modern NHL era. This does not necessarily hold true in the AHL. This does not hold true for sure in juniors. And this almost certainly didn't exist in the 80s and maybe early 90s and before. Goalies were worse then. Teams were worse at defense. There were bigger gaps between them. Essentially, teams have gotten more normalized, so these things don't change very much, even if you're trapping or not trapping. And so basically, with the current NHL, and again, this only applies there, save percentage is a very good measure. Because over a while-long season, you can compare the save percentage of Tuukka Rask to the save percentage of Kevin Poulin. Now again, there may be some outliers here. There may be some differences. There may be some weird things. For example, it would not surprise anyone if Boston was slightly suppressing shots a little bit. If they were suppressing scoring chances. It just seems like they should. But for the most part, when we see goalies switch teams, for example, Ben Scrivens was on 3 different teams over the last 3 years, and the save percentage got better with the Oilers. Which doesn't seem to make sense, even though we all know the Oilers are worse than the Kings. It doesn't seem like there's much of an effect. And again, similarly, we saw Anton Khudobin have a great season in Carolina this year, despite the fact Carolina's not Boston. So we use save percentage to measure goalies. Most analytics people prefer to use what we could refer to as even strength or occasionally 5v5 save percentage. Note there's slight differences between those. 5v5 will be slightly higher because 4v4 is a better opportunity for the shooters. So anyhow, we like to use this for a couple of reasons. One, if we don't use it, we're comparing, for example, goalies who might have different amounts of special teams time. So Ottawa took a bajillion penalties last year. So Ottawa's goalies may be slightly hindered by ordinary save percentage. Because, well, it's not their fault that they were constantly decaying. And naturally, 5v4 is a higher shooting percentage than 5v5. It's just easier because there's less defenders. By contrast, a team that doesn't commit any penalties should have goalies with slightly inflated ones. The effect isn't huge. So if you're using ordinary save percentage, anyone who complains about it to you is being a jerk. You might prefer even strength, and even strength is a better measure, but if you're okay for the most part using ordinary save percentage. Some exceptions, by the way, to this. especially in small samples, if you see a goalie, if you see a goalie who's got a ridiculously high or ridiculously low PK save percentage, midway through, early in this year, Nabokov's numbers didn't look horrible. They were bad, and they weren't horrible. Here was the problem. Nabokov had a better save percentage on penalty kill than he did at even strength. That's not really likely to continue for anyone. No goalie is going to do better at penalty kill than even strength. So using penalty kill and power play save percentage for individual goalies can be used to figure out when certain goalies are just getting unlucky with regards to small sample size flukes. Because guess what? I talk about how goalies have small sample size at even strength. On penalty kill and power play, goalie sample sizes are basically nil. So, for example, this is your sample size of saves. So this isn't shots, but this is just saves made by goalies on the PK this year, and your sample is 200 for the most of them. Would you judge a goalie based on 8 regular season games? No, and that's what you're judging based on this. That said, this stuff does matter a little bit. So, for example, the Islanders goalies were the worst by far on 4v5 last year. And what does this mean? So, I want to go through a couple things here about figuring out goalies. Let's see, gotta go to the filter. So these are just individual goalies on the penalty kill last year. Here are the out of the 3 goalies. They are 63, 64, and 66. Your only goalies worse than them on the PK last year were Craig Anderson, Darcy Kemper, Lindback, and Clemenson, none of whom only Anderson got any serious time. Needless to say, the Islanders led in a lot of shots at PK. Now, again, we want to talk about skill here. By the way, when we just talk about shot quality there, we generally find that's also the case on special teams. The difference is that special teams is a small sample, that it's possible there were gaps last year. So it's possible that some of the Islander defense on PK was the reason why our goalies have such a low save percentage, simply because the sample size is smaller. But even so, we kind of suspect, because they were so bad at even strength, that this is slightly real. Now here's the thing, right? Again, because the samples are so small on special teams, and you're going to hear me say this word a lot. Let me go back a bit, because I'm rambling a little bit. The word we like to use a lot in statistics, and it's extremely important because I can't say it enough, in hockey, and especially with goalies, is regression. I'm going to be typing it out in the chat here. Regression. Regression is the big thing. It's the big talk. Essentially, what regression means is that, and not through any skill whatsoever, that if you took a player, took anything really, but in sports sense it means this: if you took a player or a team, didn't change anything about them, and kept their skill the same, and they had one season where they had really bad results that you wouldn't expect from their skill level. If you did the season again, kept everything the same, you expect them to be much better the next year, just by what we call regression. It's like they regress to the mean. In other words, let's put it this way. This is the easiest example I have. Let's say I have a coin, okay? I flip the coin 50 times. I get 49 heads. I'm just going to write this out like that. And once you flip 50 times, you get 50 heads. Now, we know this is a truly weighted coin. There's an equal chance of getting heads or tails. So this is unbelievable. 50 heads. Wow, this coin's amazing. I should bet on this coin again, because it's going to get heads all the time. It probably won't. It's probably a real coin. So I just told you it was. Regression means that I flip it again 50 more times. What do I expect? I spent 25 heads. And now, instead of 100%, we're down to 75% if we add that in. Let's say flip it 300 more times. Again, I expect 150 heads. So now, with this whole business here, with 400, I now have what? I now have 225 heads out of 400. And I naturally chose something that gives me annoying math, but whatever. And now we're at 56.25% heads. This is regression. Regression doesn't mean we expect bad luck. Regression means that we expect average luck going forward. We expect average skill to give you average results. It means that going forward, if we know we have results that was fluky in one direction or the other, we expect the fluke to end and things to go back to average. So getting back to goalies, what does it mean for goalies? Well, on special teams, for example, where we have such small samples, we expect, and this is probably not these guys' real numbers. So, for example, Nabokov had an 8.23 last year, right? This is Nabokov over the last 6 years. Last 7 years. Where is it? It is, here it is. Nabokov's been 8.864. Significantly better. It's 5% better right there. Now, some of that's Nabokov's gotten older than he was. This is using some of the San Jose data, but odds are he's probably close to like an 8.5 or 8.4. So he'd be 2% worse than he used to be. In that case, if we did the season again next year, we expect Nabokov to an 8.5. So, yes, the Islanders, and this, by the way, is why you occasionally see bad goalies put up good seasons. So Steve Mason last year is a bad goalie. And he put up a good season because, again, goalies don't have large sample sizes. Now, the unfair thing, and this is the reason why Islander fans think goalies are evil, is the Islanders have never gotten good goalie luck since Wade Dublowitz. That year, basically, if you ever look at that year's statistics, this is 06-07, the Islanders goalies had some great luck, even the backups, so they all performed fairly decently, and that's what made sure they made the playoffs. The Islanders haven't really had good goalie luck since then, and so they've all had these bad goalies who have not had good luck, and that's been the problem right there. Now, like I said, our issue with goalies is sample size. And again, just to emphasize sample size here, we often talk about percent regression. Over a 3-year span of goalies, if I take goalies' data from 3 years, year one, so the last 3 years, and I want to see how well goalies will do the next 3 years. You need to regress it. What that means is you need to basically drop it down toward the mean of all goalies by 40%. What that means essentially is that if I have a goalie who's at, so the average is 9.15, goalie's at 9.13, 9.30 through, let's say, 3,000 shots. You actually regress 3,000 shots more, but just for my own sanity here, it means that we'd regress it. So, why don't we calculate how many saves there are, if we can do that here. So, what's 40% of 3,000? 1,200 shots at 9.15. It means we regress it all the way down to basically a 9.25. Or 9.26, really. We've gone from elite to slightly less than elite. But that's a huge regression right there, by the way. That's pretty damn big. Because, again, goalie sample size, even this is over 3 years. Over a single season, it's only like 70%. So if we just set up a goalie for 1 year, that's basically Kevin Poulin, we'll basically regress him nearly all the way to average, even though we're pretty sure he's not average. So I did some work on this at Hockey Graphs. I'm posting a link in the chat, even though I don't see anyone in this chat. Again, please sign in, please. I only see 2 people here, so I'm talking to nobody. Let me just tweet out the stream again. I'm sorry, I'm like paranoid about speaking to nobody here. There we go. That probably seems desperate. Whatever. Hope I'm amusing people at least. So I did some work on this. Basically, so what we often seem to do with goalies, because the sample sizes are so small, is just use their career averages. So, goalie's a 908 career goalie. He puts a 915 for the next 3 years. We'd say, oh, more likely to pull up a 908 in the next 3 years. What I did in using some of Eric Tulsky's work is I basically took a weighted average based on the last couple of years. So we accept the goalies can improve, and their more recent data is likely to show that improvement, so we count it more. And I can't believe these numbers for goalies right here, which is right here. But again, you still need to regress goalies if you're projecting them. And I know I said the evil word, projection. And so I regressed the goalies, and a lot of them. So, for example, Rask, who takes a ton of shots, I regressed him 35%. He lost 0.5% of his performance just to regression. And that's a goalie I know a lot about. One goalie I don't know a lot about. So Kevin Poulin, for example, he goes from an 8-9 horrific goalie to a just very bad goalie from regression alone. This isn't enough data. And so this is the goalies here. That's what I'm just trying to say here. I'll get to this more in a second. Now, again, the issue with the Islanders has been that we've had a bunch of goalies who were bad. We've had a bunch of goalies who were bad, didn't have good luck. And, we've had bad goalies with bad luck. And part of the issue has also been that, until recently, in the last 3 years we've been better at this, we also allowed a lot of shots. We don't allow a lot of shots anymore, despite what you may believe. But more of them are going in because, well, you get the idea, goalies. So where does Josef Halak, Johnson, Chad Johnson, and Chad Johnson, David Leggio fit in? Let's start with Halak here, okay? So I'm at hockeyanalysis.com. So that allows me to pull up goalie stats over a period of time. A little bit better. So let's look at Halak over the last 3 years. Okay? This is, again, only even strength. So you have 38 goalies who've played this amount of time. And here's Halak. Halak is 11th out of 30. That's very good. He's at 927. That's a little bit above average. Not a lot above average, but most goalies are around average. Halak, for example, basically has the same numbers over this period as Varlamov, and Varlamov just got paid a ton of money. So really here, Craig Anderson just got nearly similar money with a little bit less numbers here. So that's a good sign here. Again, for comparison's sake, and Ibaka doesn't even qualify. 1 second. For comparison's sake, Ibaka was a full percent, so about 15 goals, about 5 points worse. Huge difference right there. It's been played the whole year. Johnson is a little more interesting. So I need to lower my sample size a whole lot to get Johnson in here. Shut up at the top. So Johnson's amazing if you lower the sample size enough for the last 3 years. Problem is it is a tiny sample size. It's basically all last year. So if you just want to go to Chad Johnson, who will show up on this list. Here it is. Johnson is a 926 NHL goalie, but it's only over 962 shots. So we saw that we basically regressed nearly all the way to average. So we'd argue he might be an average NHL goalie. The issue is that this isn't all the data we have on Johnson. We have the AHL as well. The AHL also tracks save percentage. Now here's the thing. AHL save percentages are slightly higher than they are in the NHL. You can see someone's getting ahead of themselves because the AHL's numbers default to well, not completely, but get the point. So, for example, your average AHL save percentage is probably about 915. It's basically similar, I guess. So you got worse shooters plus worse goalies. Now let's look at Johnson. Okay. Now here's the thing. We expect, someone looked it up at one point and found that goalies tend to get about 0.7%. So they go from like 917 to 910 if they go from the AHL to NHL. That makes sense. You're facing better shooters. And here's the problem. Chad Johnson doesn't have a great AHL track record. For that fact, he's like a 909. He's basically got Kevin Poole stats in the AHL. That's not good. So, you got a guy who's basically got Kevin Poole stats in the AHL, and then in a tiny sample size, has some decent AHL numbers. It's a bit questionable how good that is. Now, here's the thing. The Islanders aren't paying Johnson much. He's totally to be the backup. And hey, the NHL numbers are more recent, so maybe he's just actually gotten better. There's some reason to be skeptical of that. Goalies, people always say goalies and defensemen mature later, but research has shown, especially for goalies, it's not true. Goalies, if they peak at all, if they get better at all, happen to age 24. Basically before goalies make the show. There was one goalie with any NHL track record under 24 last year. That was Robin Lehner of Ottawa. One. Basically, teams should probably have goalies come up earlier. And Johnson was 28 last year. Some goalies will improve later. Most won't, and Johnson probably is one of them. It's not likely that Johnson will put up a 926 like he does in the NHL. 926 would be amazing. 926 would be elite. And again, if we believe the Bruins do reduce shot quality somewhat, well, then you'd expect it to drop. But Halak, again, has got that beautiful, larger sample at slightly above average numbers. Now, again, there's a third goalie the Islanders signed this year to be the AHL goalie, a guy named David Leggio. Leggio is 30. He's the oldest of these goalies. He's also a career AHL lifer. He basically has not got an AHL shot. Here's the thing. He's actually got better numbers in the AHL than Mr. Johnson did. I think he's like a 917 career AHL goalie if I add it up. And so, if Johnson fails, there's a decent shot that Leggio could be a decent backup. And at the very worst, he helps Bridgeport a bunch, which would be nice for Bridgeport, because Bridgeport, believe it or not, and you should believe this pretty well, was the second worst team at goaltending in the AHL last year. Literally second worst. So if you were a Bridgeport Sound Tiger, you got used to bad goaltending in the AHL because you faced that in the AHL. That should be fixed this year, a little bit. Kevin Poole still with the backup, still has some issues, but it should be a lot better. By the way, the worst AHL goaltending team was the Rangers affiliate. Because those guys couldn't get used to Win Lundqvist behind them? I don't know. Whatever. So between Johnson and Leggio, you should have probably a decent backup, even if none of them are sure things. But mind you, backups are never sure things. Backups nearly always have poor sample sizes. They're nearly always mediocre goalies. That's why they're backups. You just pray Halak doesn't get hurt. But again, as a prayer that, the Islanders prayed and the backup didn't get hurt. But if the backup didn't get hurt, well, the Islanders would still be in bad shape. That was the problem last year. Now, just to finish this off, I basically made a projection system for goalies in April. So basically in baseball, there's a system called Marcel's, after Marcel the monkey. Basically meant to be the most basic projection system you can have. Basically, it takes last year's results, averages them with the results of the previous 2 years, but it treats the more recent results as more important. So your last year's results are, 2 years ago's results count 60% as much as last year's. The year before that counts 50% as much. The year after that, so I'm actually using 4 years here, count 30% according to this formulation. That's going to be slightly different than the baseball one. So using that, and then again, like I said, you need to regress. Because even with these 4 years numbers, the goalies are still going to regress a lot. And then I also tried to basically look at aging. The aging stuff, we know goalies age, we know they decline quite fast. I'm not convinced that my aging work is great here. I think it probably overpredicts how bad they get. And when I ran these numbers, looking how well they predicted the previous years, I wound up with the aging not improving things much. Didn't make them worse, but barely improving. So take it for a grain of salt. Halak shows up of the goalies we have any sample size for. Here. So if you ignored aging, Halak would show up with a 917. Above average. Hooray. If you include Aiden, this is over the next 3 years. If you include Aiden, you have a 913. Just below average. Mind you, when I say just below average, nearly every goalie after aging is below average. Because goalies age so fast. And new goalies will take these guys' place, so that's why there'll be more goalies here. But anyhow, for at least the next 3 years, assuming Halak doesn't get hurt again, the Islanders should be a lot better with Halak again. Can't say the same for Johnson. Halak's actually younger. The Islanders did well this offseason, though. Halak was the best free agent goaltender by this analysis. The Islanders signed him up. You can't complain. They got the best guy. The only 2 guys who were comparable were Brian Elliott, who St. Louis locked up early, and Thomas Greiss, who Pittsburgh locked up to be the backup. I was actually hoping the Islanders to get Greiss as their backup, but apparently they wanted cheaper. Though I'm not even sure Johnson got less. So anyhow, I think that's basically covering goalies. So, to sum up, we know about goalies here. Single-season goalie sample sizes are small. So random fluke things, or just random bad play. I mean, listen, if I play basketball, like 10 times against one of you guys, I will probably lose every game. I'm bad. I'm not very athletic. But there's a chance that one day, one of those 10 days, you will come in to the basketball game feeling sick, and I'll come in feeling really great, and basically all my shots will go in, and I'll win. It's not because I'm better than you. It's because these things happen. Guys have occasional bad performances. Now, you've got a small sample size, so let's say you only play one basketball game, and let's say that was the one game where I had a great day and you had a horrible day. You'd think that I was better than I was. Same thing's true with goalies. Because the sample size is so small, if a goalie has a few good days, they're not really indicative of how good they are. Like the Pool and the Wild game versus San Jose this year, it affects things a lot. So that's sort of what we mean by random variation. We mean some good days that are uncharacteristic. We mean some lucky bounces, yada, yada, yada. So random flukes happen a lot, both good and bad. 2, even with longer sample size for goalies, we still don't trust their samples. 3. Save percentage is a decent measure of goalies. And it's the best measure we have. 4. Special teams save percentage, which the Islanders were awful at last year, probably isn't going to repeat. So Dak Capuano's talked about, how they're going to fix the Isles PK this year. The Isles PK is probably fixed just by having Halak. So Halak should fix that just by his own. And just, even if they had Nabokov again, such team save percentage would have gone up. It was mostly a mirage how bad the Isles save percentage was in the penalty kill. 3. Halak, Leggio, and Johnson seems to give them a good bet at fixing things. And here's the last point, which should scare a living crap out of all of you. I said good bet. I didn't say we'll fix things. Again, we don't know a huge amount of goalies because the data we have isn't great. And there's a decent chance that even with good goalies, you get bad luck and everything goes wrong. I'm getting a phone call, so I will then take this, and then after this we'll talk about the subjects. Okay, I'm not sure how many people are still here. I'm not sure how many people were here in the beginning. It looks like I basically stayed between 3 and 4 viewers, and I think one of them is myself, keeping track of things. So yeah, still not the greatest viewership here. I apologize again if I'm rambling, and I'd love if people would be in the chat so they could talk. So I'm just going to tweet out that we're going to be switching topics here. So again, the Islanders seem to have fixed their goalie problems. We can't be sure. Okay. Let's talk Josh freaking Baylor. Josh Bailey is the enigma. Okay? He's the first rounder we all hope to be better. He hasn't been. This isn't a bad one, but. And he has since moved from center to wing. And again, he's been very contentious. Bailey's always been a high shooting percentage guy. His shots have gone in more often than others, but he doesn't shoot very much. He's always been known as a playmaker, but he hasn't scored and he hasn't really playmade that much, so Isles fans have always been very disappointed in him. Now, Bailey's basically played his entire career in what we call the behind-the-net era. So we have fancy stats for his whole career. So let's just organize them by, I've written that. This is behindthenet.ca, which I mentioned before. Apparently, there's a new stat site coming up on Monday, which some people have been showing off online. I look forward to it. Have some cool things being shown off on Twitter, but hopefully it'll work very well, which is the important thing here. Anyhow, more importantly here, we know Bailey's point production has been unimpressive for his center life and for even the last 2 years of wing. He looked good in the lockout, didn't have the greatest point amounts in last year. But by the way, he put up a decent amount of points after the Isles were in contention. Bailey had that issue where he didn't score during that streak. Now here's the thing. We talked about this with goalies, talked about random small samples. Shooting percentage is just as random sometimes. And in samples like that, like the 20 games he went with 2 points, a lot of that was just bad luck. Same thing with Grabner. And that's why, all of a sudden he started shooting well, or team started shooting well with him after that streak and after they were basically out of it. That's not because of, it was easy ice time all of a sudden, or, less pressure. It's more like the luck turned around. So odds are, the point production isn't that bad. If you look over the last 3 years, Bailey is middle of the pack in points per 60. It's not horrible. It's not great. But it's not horrible. So Bailey's a good possession player. And Bailey's a fine third liner worth keeping. And by the way, I keep hearing people talk about how Bailey is being paid too much. Bailey isn't being paid that much, per se. So this is Bailey's contract right here. Bailey got paid $2 million last year. He's making $3.1 this year. 3.1 basically puts you at a mediocre second liner or third liner number. It's not a huge amount, and the cap's going up. So it's not as big as people think it is. Bailey's cap is 3.3. It's really not a big contract. So there really isn't as much pressure to perform here. I'm gonna get close to this stuff. That's how Dallas takes time. Cool. There isn't that big of a thing here. So anyhow, making sure you can read this. 1 second. A bit hard to read. Okay, we'll zoom in. That should make it better. There we go. Much better. Okay. Sorry about that. So this is Bailey's numbers over his career. So just looking fancy stats wise. His first 3 years, he basically showed himself to be a guy who was a center, so this is without playing Franz Nielsen. He basically was not a puck possession guy. But he wasn't a bad puck possession guy either. Basically, Bailey was about average. He didn't push play forward, he didn't hurt the team by being on the ice. That's okay. You prefer a little more point production for those guys, but outside of your first liner and probably your second liners, what you want in third and fourth liners, and this is again the problem with Bailey, is that you envision him as a second liner. If you consider him the third liner, then if you consider Tavares center number 1, Nielsen center number 2, and if you consider Bailey center number 3, then that's okay. Your third liner and fourth liner guys you want not harming you possession wise, and then maybe putting some other things. The 2 years after that, however, so his last year's center, he had some not great possession numbers. That's an issue. And then during the lockout, he and the Nielsen line had some issues, despite him being on wing. Some of that was bad luck. There's some evidence, so I did neutrals on Kraken, and they showed the Nielsen-Bailey line 2 years ago during the lockout season was still great, and that they had some really awful defensive zone numbers, which are more fluky than anything, and weren't likely to continue. And so this year, same line, without Halak, and all of a sudden he's massively driving possession forward with that line. So is Bailey really a good possession player? My bet is probably no. Even at wing, with this stuff right here, and the balance of his career basically says the truth. Bailey's an average possession player. That's okay, but it's not great. We're not in love with that. And there's a reason for that. We want more than that from our players. Now, at the same time, again, this means that you can put him next to a plus possession player like Franz Nielsen, and you'll probably have a plus possession line. It won't be a superstar line, but still a good line. So, let's go to Bailey's point production here, okay? Because I feel like that's the issue here. Like I said, Bailey's not that bad of a point producer. Even last year. So this is last year at 5v5. Putting aside whether Bailey should play 5v4 or not, and which there's a lesser chance he'll play that much of it this year. Okay? This is for the 500 minutes played. Point per 60. Bailey comes in at 160 out of 546 guys. Let's increase the sample size here. So we have a bunch of guys who've only played a smaller amount of minutes. So here's our 850 sample size. So now we have 352 players. We'll see. I don't want to include defensemen. Let's. Here we go. So now we have 205 players, from Jay McClement, who basically couldn't score with the dam, to Ryan Getzov, Corey Perry. You may know these guys. Okay, where did Bailey show up? Right here, 122. So basically a little worse than average. But that's not that bad here. Again, we just found him to be an average possession player with average point production. And this is last year when he seemingly had bad performance. What's really going on here? Well, let's look at 5v4. He actually had okay point production on 5v4 as well. But what's going on here is that small streaks really take a big part of our mind. We saw Bailey having issues scoring during that huge stretch, and we think, "Oh, Bailey, you suck. We don't want you anymore." That doesn't make any sense. Bailey's probably an average winger. He's average point production, average puck possession guy, and $3 million's not a huge overpay for that type of guy. So that's basically a guy who's a middle, second, and third line. And here's the secret now: with Kuhlman and Grabowski on second line, well, Bailey's on third. So it really doesn't make much sense of dealing Bailey unless you get a guy, because the alternatives aren't great. So I had Colin McDonald up here earlier. Colin McDonald also doesn't seem to drive possession, and probably makes possession a little bit worse, which means he's worse than Bailey. He also scores less than Bailey. Basically, they're not comparable. Now, I know one guy on Lighthouse Hockey, Afro Supreme, complains that, well, McDonald lives up to his salary, which he does. The difference is that we don't care. Bailey's on the books. So unless the Owls have a hard cap that they can't afford Bailey, and they must trade him, because they won't be able to afford the amount of players they have, it really makes no sense. And the Islanders don't appear to have that right now. They certainly have a hard cap that's keeping them from spending much more. They almost certainly won't spend more, and they almost certainly won't retain salary in a Bailey deal unless they get someone great back. But it really doesn't make sense to trade Bailey, because he's an average player, and you need average players. An average player on your third line is a win for your team because, well, third liners should be slightly below average, and that's the deal. I don't seem to have anyone in the chat, so I'll wait like a minute or two before I